Happy Monday, everyone. Thanks very much for joining us. It's great to see so many supporters able to make the time to get an update on our Ukraine program. I am Jim Hake. I'm the founder and CEO of Spirit of America. And as background, we are a nonprofit citizen service organization. We work alongside and with U.S. troops and diplomats all over the world to help them save and improve lives. And we've been very active in Ukraine since 2014, and especially since Russia's the war launched on February 24th. Since in the early days in 2014, we were providing first aid kits to Ukrainian soldiers who were being trained by American soldiers in the western part of the country. And one of the most notable projects that we got started back in 2014, 2015 was the startup of Ukraine's first armed forces media property, Army FM, a radio station to provide an answer to Russian propaganda and misinformation, which was bombarding Russian soldiers in the eastern part of the country. Right now, we are doing everything we can to help Ukraine defend its freedom and help Ukraine win. And from a humanitarian standpoint, our approach is to stop the suffering in Ukraine at its source. And the source of that suffering, of which we all read so much about, is the war that Russia launched on a free and sovereign country, Ukraine. So in doing that, our focus is on providing protective aid and assistance to Ukrainian soldiers and civilian volunteers on the front lines. Mary is going to share in the question and answer section some of the media coverage of our work since the war began. I encourage you to take a look at those links when you have a moment. But two of our team, you see here, are just out of Ukraine, currently in Moldova this evening, their time. And Colleen Denny is going to kick things off for us. Colleen is our Europe director. She is a former Coast Guard captain and has been leading our efforts in Eastern Europe and Ukraine, well, both since the war began, certainly, but also over the last year and a half. So Colleen, over to you. Oh, by the way, everyone, a housekeeping matter. If you have a question, please put that in the question and answer section down on the bottom of your Zoom toolbar, and we'll do our best to address that as we roll along in the next, I guess, 26 minutes now. And if we can't get to your question, we'll do our best to get back to you afterwards. We have a hard stop at the half hour. So Colleen, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim, and good evening, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Colleen Denny, our Regional Director for Europe. Just to set the stage again, so we were talking with our U.S. Military and diplomatic partners well before the full-scale invasion happened, anticipating and looking at what the Russian force laydown was in December, January, and February. So when the full-scale invasion happened on February 24th, within 24 hours, the U.S. military teams that had been in Ukraine and were relocated outside of Ukraine into neighboring countries called me and said, how quickly can Spirit of America get here? Because we need all the assistance we can get. So after arriving on the ground on March 1st, we brought our first plane into the area on March 18th. And total, we've had 4 cargo planes bring aid worth over $23 million. It's 165 tons, and that aid has consisted of over 9,200 sets of body armor and ballistic helmets, over 20,000 individual first aid kits. We've purchased 10 trucks for elite units to help with their transportation and ability to move and communicate, and also 950 passenger buses that are transporting troops, moving them into areas that are needed, and also moving out wounded and other civilians that need to evacuate too. So our footprint has been, very significant in Ukraine since February 24th invasion. Matt Dimmick and I, we just spent the last several days in Ukraine, as far east as Kyiv, and we were meeting with civilian sector leadership, members of parliament, the Deputy Minister of Defense and the State Secretary of Defense, Army FM, the radio station that Jim talked about, that's still up and running today with hundreds and hundreds of thousands of listeners and subscribers. and meeting with the leadership of the Territorial Defense Force. So a great couple days on the ground to talk to our partners and better understand the problem sets that they're facing today, and also the impact that Spirit of America aid has had with them. So what we saw and what we heard on this trip, overarching message from every Ukrainian that we met is the urgency that we felt back in February and March still exists for them today, and that donations are needed today and aid is needed today just as much as it was on February 24th or March 18th. The war has become a war of attrition. It is grinding, it is deadly, it is costly, and they need constant replenishment. Think of the individual first aid kits that we've donated, over 20,000 of them. They're outfitted to help you treat one, maybe two partners on the field, depending on what the injuries are. So those are in need of constant replenishment and replacement. If a bulletproof vest is shot once, it is compromised. So the protection and protective aid that we were giving them is constantly needing to be replenished. So really an emphasis on thank you for the partnership. Thank you for your demonstrations of support, but we still need it now just as more as ever. So that would be a big takeaway for us. The second large takeaway was the continued resolve and commitment that our Ukrainian partners have in this fight. They know what they're fighting for. They know that if they stop fighting, that Ukraine will cease to exist. So they are more motivated and resolute than ever, and also battle hardened after the last several months and 8 years of this war and this invasion that Russia has launched on them. So morale is high, they're committed, they're not rosy-eyed. They know this is very, very difficult and they're taking hard losses, but they are resolute and committed to their fight and know there's no other alternative. And the third large takeaway, I would say, is just true appreciation for the United States and for organizations like Spirit of America for our partnership. And they want to emphasize that our work is not just charity. It's really they're fighting not only for themselves, but also for all of the West and all of countries that have free and democratic values. So while they are extremely thankful and looking forward to continued support, they're also understanding that we're all partners in this together, and that now more than ever that partnership needs to continue and maintain its strength. So really wonderful couple of days, very difficult to meet with some of our partners and hear what they're facing and see what they're going through, but also very inspiring to better understand how they have risen to the occasion despite all the odds being against them. Finally, kind of a capstone moment was Matt and I went to the Ministry of Defense and we met with the Deputy Minister of Defense and the State Secretary of Defense, where they presented Spirit of America with a Medal of Partnership and also a recognition for the aid that we have done. And to our knowledge and our partners' knowledge, this is the first time that the Ministry of Defense has done this to any private NGO or nonprofit. So really significant award. It was an honor to receive it. And we couldn't do any of this without all of your support and without everyone continuing to pay attention to what's happening in Ukraine, to understand what's at stake for our Ukrainian partners and for our allies around the world. And it was truly a great moment and a real moment of partnership between the Ministry of Defense and Spirit of America. So we would just like to thank you all for all your continued support. And we look forward to being able to do more in Ukraine, especially here in the summertime as things are really starting to pick up. So with that, I'll pass it over to Matt Dimmick to continue discussing what we saw and what we're forecasting next.
Hey, Matt, I'm sorry, Matt, before we get started, I just want to pile on one thing that Colleen said. So Colleen mentioned that we have provided almost 10,000 sets of bulletproof vests or flak jackets, also known as body armor, and ballistic helmets. So about 10,000 sets of all of that. And to put it in perspective, there are 2,500 US Navy SEALs, there are 3,600 Army Rangers, and about 3,000 Marine Special Operations Forces in the US military. And those are the elite combat forces in the United States. So in about 75 days, we equipped, think of it as we equipping each one of them with protective aid that they need. So that's the kind of scale that we've been providing assistance on in Ukraine. And anyway, I just wanted to add that to what you said, Colleen. Matt, I'm sorry, over to you.
Oh, thanks, Jim. Hey, I think what Spirit of America does best that other nonprofits maybe not have the advantage of is that we're so tied into the Ukrainian military and Ukrainian officials, as well as our U.S. partners, that we have a pretty good sense of what's going on the ground, which helps us anticipate what the future needs will be. And we saw that play out again on this trip. We were able to talk with all of the senior officials within the Ministry of Defense that we have contact with, as well as the TDF. And they confirmed for us that this is a grinding fight, and it is changing and it's evolving, and they gave us a little bit of a preview of what we can expect to come. And what they described to us, what's going on in the battlefield, if you'd thought maybe 2 months ago that Ukraine would be demoralized, that they were heading for some kind of grinding stalemate, and that they would just have to accept whatever the Russians were going to dictate to them, that situation does not bear at all with what is going on the ground today for a number of reasons. You saw 2 months worth, 3 months worth of the Russians impaling themselves up in the northeast corner of Ukraine against Lysychansk and Severodonetsk. Those were bloody, bleeding conflicts for the Russians, and it sapped a lot of their force posture and sapped a lot of their ability. It also created a lot of weaknesses throughout the rest of that 1,000-kilometer line stretching from the north all the way down to the south. Ukrainians have been watching carefully, they're plotting, they're planning, and they're using a lot of these new weapon systems to take advantage of that situation. So what we saw was Ukrainians are, they don't know when this is going to end. It could take months, could take many, many months, long into the future, but they're not playing for a tie, they're not playing for a draw, and they're not playing for any kind of settlement. They know that they have to defeat the Russians, and if they don't, then the Russians are just going to go back, nurse their wounds, and come back for another bite. So there's no quit in the Ukrainians that we saw, and they now have some additional resources and some additional planning and some emerging opportunities that they are going to pounce on in the next couple of months. So what we can expect to see is the Ukrainians using some of these extremely lethal and precise weapons that they're getting in waves from Western partners, especially the HIMARS. And they're just devastating the Russians, sapping their strength and creating a lot of opportunities that they can exploit in the future. So we look forward to seeing that. We also saw several pieces of good news come their way while we were there. There's an agreement on grain shipments, which gives them a lot of confidence that they can survive some economic headwinds. These HIMARS systems are so magically precise that they are just devastating the Russians, and they know that more is on the way. They also, as they work with groups like us, they expressed to us time and time again that they'll continue this fight alone if they have to, but they need the partnership and the help and the support of every country, every government, and help from the American people. So when they see our organization there, it gives them a boost, a shot in the arm, a little boost of morale that says the West and others are still with them, still supporting them. And they know that every bit of that support will not only reduce bloodshed on their side, but it'll also hasten the day when this conflict will come to an end. And they appreciate deeply the kind of support they're getting through organizations like ours. And ours is really leading organization that's helping the military and the TDF when it comes to giving them the ability to stand up to the Russians and take the fight to them on the front lines and support frontline troops. So those are big takeaways. A lot of good things happening for the Ukrainians. We've got them right ahead of the wind will avail, and we can help make that time come faster, and we can help the Ukrainians do it with less bloodshed.
Hey, Matt, we're losing you a little bit, so it would probably be better if you turned off your video for a moment, please. And I'll give you a moment to think about, which I think you just touched on one of our questions. Again, if you all have a question, please put it in the Q&A chat, Q&A button on the bottom of your Zoom toolbar. But Matt, one of the questions is there any real prospect of success against the Russians?
So it's war is the most contingent thing on the planet, and it's it's difficult to say how this thing is going to end or how it's going to unspool. But if you had to take the trajectory of where the Ukrainians are going, as well as match that with the way the Russians are fighting, I would have to say that all bets are on the Ukrainians, and that's the smart bet. Now, how long that will take is really the million-dollar question. But I think in the end, the Ukrainians are going to come out and they're going to end this conflict on their terms, and and really defeat the Russians in a way that will make it impossible for the Russians to ever try this again.
And another question touches on the Mary. Could you put up the slide about the U.S. aid to Ukraine for a moment, please? Everyone, I hope you can all see this. We're happy to share it with you after the fact. It's a top-level picture of the use of the $40 billion of aid and that's been provided to Ukraine, or has been announced to be provided to Ukraine. And it links up with another question. And the question of one of our participants notes that the mother of an American soldier just killed in the Donbass had told her many times that on the front lines, they still lack helmets, body armor, and that sort of those sort of basic supplies and protective aid. And her question is, why is that still happening? And we'll answer that question more specifically. But what we thought would be helpful, and what Matt's going to speak to on the slide, is the $40 billion of assistance to Ukraine that's been announced by President Biden. And it's useful to see how that breaks down. And it leads to the conclusion that there are still many gaps on the front lines that is the kinds of things that we are focused on the kind of gaps that we're focused on filling. But Matt, if you could just give a brief overview of where that $40 billion has gone or where it's going, and that'd be very helpful for folks, I think.
Yeah, that $40 billion was certainly a boost for the Ukrainians, but it's important to remember how that money gets spent and where it goes and how fast it gets spent. And the reality is that of that $40 billion, more than half of that was going to things that just did not directly affect the Ukrainian military. It went for other things that will help the Ukrainians and keep up their strength in a variety of ways. But less than half went towards anything that was remotely related to supporting Ukrainian military. So when you break that down, and we've on the chart there, you see that $19 billion is tagged as type of military support. $4 billion of that for the foreign military financing. Those are long-term, years-out programs that the Ukrainians will benefit from as they professionalize their force going forward. But it doesn't affect today's battlefield. Equally, the $9 billion that was laid out for replacing stocks, that's just the dollar value of what we're sending over to Ukraine, and that's the HIMARS, the Stingers, the Javelins, all that lethal equipment that's having such a devastating effect on the battlefield. But those are expensive items, and they're billions of dollars goes into that very quickly for a small number of systems. And then what we're also looking at is Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative. There is equipment that is purchased out of that pot, but only a fraction of the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative funding of $6 billion goes towards any equipment purchases. And with all the other things that are in that pot, probably less than $2 billion of that is actually buying things. And you have to remember, under the USAI Assistance Initiative, when we spend money towards equipment in that tranche, that we have to go to the vendor and buy that, which means the vendor has to make it. We've got supply chain issues, all other factors go into it. So Ukrainians won't get the benefit of that USAI funding for as long as it takes the vendors to produce what we ask them to produce and send to Ukraine. So grand scale, the government's working as hard as they can to put that money into operation, but it can only be moved so fast because each of those pots of money has different purposes and they move at varying speeds, mostly slow. So that's why you're seeing lots of equipment headed to Ukraine that we already have on hand, but the other pieces and parts that require purchasing or planning are going to take months, maybe even years down the road before the Ukrainians see that. So that's why the needs within the Ukrainian military are still vast. There are huge gaps to fill, and every bit helps. And our organization has a specific specific role to play in filling gaps where it counts on the front line with some soldiers that need that body armor, helmet, other life-saving gear, and important equipment that they need to take the fight to the Russians. So that's a little bit of a breakdown there, a little bit of a picture for you.
And so one of the conclusions from it is, of course, 40 billion, it sounds like, and certainly is, a lot of money. Less than half of that is going to support the Ukrainian military. And at the very top of that list are the weapon systems that they've been requesting since, well, for quite a long time. Those are the things at the top of their list, and the kinds of things that the protective aid and assistance, the non-lethal assistance that Spirit of America is providing is for the large part of the government funding just not being touched at all. And Colleen, could you, Mary, you can stop sharing the chart. Thank you. Colleen, could you say a little bit about how we have deconflicted to make sure that we're not doing things that government is doing in providing the assistance that we are, please?
Sure. And this is another unique way that Spirit of America operates, in that most of us on the field team were military veterans, but we are no longer a part of a chain of command. So we can talk to a 4-star general, we can talk to a corporal, or we can talk to deputy assistant secretaries of defense. And so by doing all of that, we're able to deconflict. So back in May, when this huge security assistance package was announced by the White House, Jim and I spoke to Laura Cooper, and she is the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Europe and Eurasia. So Ukraine and Russia are in her portfolio. And we called her to better understand and make sure that Spirit of America was not duplicating any efforts that were now being covered by major US government assistance. And she assured us that all of the aid and supplies that we had been providing to Ukraine would still be continuously needed, and we're not at risk of duplicating any efforts. So for example, we have provided vehicles, trucks, vans, and buses. She confirmed that the only vehicles that is part of these big US government aid packages are big trucks that are able to tow and move around some of the HIMARS and other heavy equipment. They're not providing any sort of trucks or troop movement vehicles. Also with body armor and helmets. She confirmed that the needs there are bottomless, just as we have seen, and that there is no risk of any sort of duplication or overstocking or Spirit of America providing things that weren't needed. So she said, in the strongest of terms, asked us to keep continuing providing the aid that we were and are providing, and confirmed that there was no duplication, no overlapping of efforts there at all. Jim, you're on mute.
Thank you. Thanks, Colleen. So to the participant who asked about why are there still gaps and needs with body armor and so forth on the front lines, one of the big issues is that the civilian volunteers who comprise what is referred to, called the Territorial Defense Forces, were civilians when the war began, and there are more than 100,000 Territorial Defense Forces who have gone to defend Ukraine and help fight on the front line since the war began. So that's just about the equivalent of the entire US Marine Corps showing up and saying, well, here we are, we don't have any equipment. And that's in addition to the conventional forces, which have also grown in size. So all of that and the speed with which this happened has left a good number of gaps. And very sadly, a lot of those gaps are on the front lines. They are ones which we're trying very, very hard to fill ourselves. Another question is some reporting the U.S. has become pessimistic about the prospects for Ukraine's success. Are there news reports you can think of that we should take with a grain of salt? And I might say maybe a better one is, are there news reports you can think of that we should not take with a grain of salt? But either way you want to handle that, Colleen and Matt, is the pessimism that we sometimes see in the news media well-founded, or how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I would say there are definitely challenges. The Ukrainian military and logistical system was by no means perfect before February 24, and those problems didn't magically disappear once the full-scale invasion happened. However, the Ukrainian military and the Territorial Defense Force have proven to us time and time again of how capable and how resolute they are. There seems to be a paternal sense from the United States of slowly giving the aid, making sure the Ukrainians can use it, and then scaling it up. And the Ukrainians have demonstrated time and again their capacity to quickly learn, to train up, and to use all of the aid that has been supplied very efficiently. So, you know, a lot of the slow progress or negative progress that the Ukrainian military has made over the last 2 months is the tides are starting to shift, especially with the delivery of the HIMARS and other long-range equipment that the U.S. military and partner allies are providing. We anticipate, and especially after some of our meetings that we sat in with various members of the Ministry of Defense and Territorial Defense, there is you know, they're like Matt said, they have adjusted, they have learned, and they're planning for what's next, and they're about ready to execute what's next too. So we anticipate a shift in the tides of war here coming over the next several weeks, and that the reporting in the United States and in the West will begin to reflect that. Jim, you're on mute again. Sorry.
I'm a slow learner, but I'm a learner. Last question. What are you working to ship today?
Yep. So right now we are moving some medical trauma kits, over 200 of them. These are advanced trauma kits that contain collapsible litters, as well as some advanced trauma care inside of it. This is for trained medics and corpsmen to be using in the field. They're very different than just the individual first aid kits that every soldier carries. So those are being distributed and moved as we speak to frontline units, both within the Ukrainian Armed Forces as well as the Territorial Defense Force. We're also looking at supporting long-term projects with the Territorial Defense, particularly focused in training of the Territorial Defense Force, since, like Jim said, 5-6 months ago, these people were accountants and IT people and wine distributors, and now they are volunteers in the Territorial Defense. So there is a huge training gap that exists that we are going to work to help address, so that there's sustainability and professionalization, and therefore lives saved on the battlefield for the Territorial Defense. You know, so we are so thankful for everyone's support, because we can't do any of this without you. We hope to be able to still continue our operations there as we receive the funding.
And also on the next up list is more of the body armor, helmets, and first aid gear, first aid kits that Colleen and Matt heard about on their recent visit to Kyiv and Ukraine. So we'll close out now. I want to thank everyone for joining us again. I can promise you that individually and as an organization, we're going to do everything we can to help stop the suffering in Ukraine. We are not neutral. We are taking Ukraine's side, and stopping the suffering means helping Ukraine win. Russia's invasion of Ukraine began in 2000, the recent one in recent times in 2014. There were 2 ceasefire agreements in 2014 and 2015, and all that was never honored. It led up to the war that Russia launched now. So when the Ukrainians say the only end of this is if they win, they're correct. And thank you for being part of our team to do everything we can. It is a defining moment in the fight to defend the free world. Thank you, everyone.